The legalization of marijuana is just around the corner. The market has been projected to be worth more than $10 billion. For some, that suggests the marijuana industry is going to be a gold rush. That is, until you look inside. It is a labyrinth of rules, regulations, background checks, banks that won't give you an account, a reliance on investors, and still there are no guarantees you'll get a license. The government won't be propping you up. In fact, it will be watching you very closely to ensure your products meet exacting standards and that everything you do conforms to the law. There are, however, entrepreneurs who think it's worth the risk. And risk is the operative word. Just because marijuana and the production of it will become legal in Canada, it doesn't mean it's legal anywhere else except Uruguay. The United States has already stated that if you work in or invest in marijuana, you could be banned from entry into the U.S. for life. We invited medical marijuana entrepreneur Justin Dhaliwal to join us for a conversation that matters about the process, the risks, and the benefits of obtaining a license to produce cannabis.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Mr. Dhaliwal, welcome to Conversations That Matter.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm fascinated by the fact that you have decided that you want to get into the medical marijuana business. First of all, what's your motivation for wanting to do that? Because it is complex. It's not just this gold rush. It's a very complex process. But there must be something that's driving you. What is it that made you want to get into this sector?
So our company is very much focused on the medicinal side of this industry. Mm-hmm. What really touched me and got me involved was when I watched the documentary by Sanjay Gupta called Weeds, mm-hmm. and saw the impact that it had on small children that were suffering from epilepsy. And that's when it really hit me. I said, well, you know, I could be part of a whole new industry, an industry that could help improve the quality of lives of people. Mm-hmm. And then one of the things I also realized that there's a real lack of, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, mm-hmm. but there is a lack of scientific evidence. So one of the concerns I had when I saw this documentary is, you know, it's great that it helps young kids. It can help whether young or older, but it can help people that are suffering from a variety of illnesses. But what are the long-term impacts? Mm-hmm. For example, a child who's 5 years old who's taking small doses of oil cannabis, what impact will it have on them 10 years down the road?
Well, we don't know the answer, do we?
Exactly, and that's why we wanted to get involved, and the reason we got involved was to focus on the medicinal side, and that's why we partnered with the University of British Columbia as well to really focus on the research and development of this product and how it could help patients, what illnesses it can help, what are the impacts, short-term and long-term.
But I understand there's also a personal connection.
Yes, there is. I lost my mother to cancer in 2004. My wife lost her father to cancer as well. And one of the things that were very troubling is watching the physicians treat her with her pain by using Celebrex, Valium, or Tylenol 3. And in the last days when people are in palliative care, you want them to have a good quality of life. And not being able to have those cognitive abilities is something that I felt personal connection, and I know my father-in-law, he did use cannabis towards the end of his life. He was able to have the cognitive abilities, able to function, able to speak to his children. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that's very important.
So was he taking it for pain management?
Exactly, it was directly for pain management and also to help his appetite, because when you're on chemotherapy, you lose your appetite and you don't tend to eat. So that's for those two reasons.
Okay, so what is it that you specifically are going to do? Because the range of medical applications for cannabis is vast.
Exactly.
What are you hoping to do? Because as you pointed out, the research is still, very, very early.
Yes, it is. And so I'm not the expert on that. And that's why we teamed up with Dr. Julio Montana and Dr. MJ Malloy and Dr. Evan Wood from UBC. They also head up the HIV Center for Excellence at St. Paul's Hospital.
Right.
And one of the things that they're working on is looking at the impacts that cannabis has on patients with HIV.
Yes.
Chronic pain and nausea. And so Dr. MJ Malloy has been working with thousands of patients throughout Vancouver has been collecting data on them to identify what strains they're using, which ailments and sicknesses they have, to then determine and see, well, here's a specific strain that will help this ailment.
Yep.
And what are the short-term impacts and long-term impacts? And through that data, then once we're in production, we can start focusing on which strains we should be producing and which ailments they'll be able to treat.
So seeing as we're at a point in the, I guess, legislative cycle around this where it's not legal yet, are you able to conduct experiments even though there has been this, license for people to use medical marijuana, but without having had licensed producers or LPs, has it made it difficult for you to be able to start to build that body of research that will prove out your theory?
I think any time where you're dealing with a controlled substance that is illegal, it becomes very difficult. How do you handle it? How do you store it? How do you produce it? The benefit of working with an institution like UBC is that they've got a lot of great resources when it comes to research. There are research and development licenses you can use. However, I believe UBC has been contacting patients that do have a license. It's not a license, sorry, a prescription from their physician.
Right.
And
so they legally have the right to use.
Yes, they do. And they've given them a simple form and asked them to fill out the form, and if they can, contact them and collect data based on their usage. So everything they've done has been legal, but once it becomes legal for recreational use, I think there'll be a lot more access to funding. It'll open up the possibilities that we can do with research and development.
I got to get you to hang on for just a second while we take a quick commercial break.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be right back. Sorry for the interruption, but I need your help. I'm asking you to support the show by becoming a patron. That means pledging $1 per show. Conversations is a unique program. There's no grandstanding, no arguing, no yelling. Instead, I sit down with people who have unique insights, specialized knowledge, and experiences that inform and enlighten. And we do this on an incredibly limited budget with a very small crew. Well, this is my office and it's where I edit the show. And then once it's ready, we give it away. So many different websites around the world are carrying this show, but they get it for free. They don't pay us. So I'm asking you to pledge $1 per show by going to patreon.com/conversations that matter. Thanks. We want to keep producing conversations, and with your help, we can. Now let's get back to the show. So that's one application. Do you have more than one application for your products as you continue to develop them?
I think within the confines of what is legal, there's quite a few restrictions in terms of what we can do, but I'm sure as legalization comes into effect, there'll be a lot more things that you can do in terms of looking at creams. For example, when you talk about anecdotal evidence, Dr. MJ Malloy knows one of his relatives, and she's been an elderly lady who's been working in a restaurant her whole life, and her knees are shot.
Yeah.
Right, and she was able to get a cannabis-based cream and apply it to her knees, and it's helped her immensely. So there's a variety of different products that people are using currently that I see that they'll slowly be allowed into the legal framework over the course of the next 3 to 5 years.
Right, but it's going to take time before we have that empirical evidence that we so rely on, especially when it comes to any kind of active drug agent that we're going to consume, especially under the banner of we want it to be safe, because that is one of the reasons for legalizing cannabis or marijuana. What does the process of becoming a licensed producer look like? How do you start?
It's a simple application in terms of what you submit to Health Canada, but it's a very complicated process. To give an example, we submitted our application in August of 2014. And I believe that Health Canada has done a good job in terms of vetting everyone who's received a license, especially you're talking about a controlled substance. And it's rightfully so they should be doing their due diligence and taking their time to making sure that whoever does receive a license, it doesn't go in the wrong hands. To give an example, our application is somewhere around 1,500 pages. We've got, and one of the biggest challenges is that you have to have a property prior to having your license.
You have to buy property first?
Unless you have a landlord that's willing to have an agreement with you, and you have to be paying the landlord over the course of 3 years. So it's a huge upfront capital cost. You also
It's
have
enormous.
Yes, and you have to have a facility that's up and running. So there's huge barriers to entry in terms of the initial upfront capital costs.
So how much land do you need?
Well, you don't need very much. There's companies that have been licensed with a small 4,000 square foot footprint.
Okay.
And it's really where you want to position yourself in the market. Depends on how much land you want. We've acquired 68 acres in the Fraser Valley Regional District. That allows us to build up to 1 million square feet of greenhouses. Now for us, obviously we want to wait till we're at a certain point past security before we start putting up money to build a facility.
But have you already had to build a greenhouse based on what you were saying about the application process, that you have to have a facility ready to go?
Yes, you do. We haven't built our facility yet. So we've started the prep work, we've got our plans, right? We've submitted them to the city, so we should be receiving our building permit very shortly, and then upon receiving our building permit, then we would break ground. Yeah.
And where is this?
It's located in the Fraser Valley Regional District. The land is much cheaper out there, and it also is, it has a good environment for also greenhouse growing.
Well, yeah, and I guess you don't want to be too close to neighbors that you might be stinking them out.
Exactly. You want to be in an area, and it's in the agricultural land reserve. So, I think for the purposes of for growing, an agricultural product, greenhouse is the way to go if you want to reduce your costs.
Well, and it also gives you a more an extended growing period, because my understanding, virtually anywhere else in Canada other than the Lower Mainland, you're not going to have a long enough growing season.
Yeah, so our temperature is very likable for this product. I mean, you're in the winter time, you're not spending as much money on heating. In the summertime, you're not spending as much time as cooling when you compare BC to areas such as Ontario or Alberta.
So you don't have a license yet?
No, we don't. Prior to this, Health Canada, when you entered security screening, they would wait till you get out of security screening before you enter the review stage. And once you get into review stage, essentially you're in a lineup and there's a bunch of files in front of you that then go into active review. When you're in active review, you have a case manager reviewing your file, and they'll take about 10 days to go through your entire file and then send back a letter asking for additional information if they're not satisfied with what you've provided. Back in May, to help streamline the process, Health Canada said, well, we're not going to wait till you get out of security. We'll start reviewing your file now. So by the time you get out of security, you might go into active review right away.
Now, are they doing that now because they're starting to fast track with this legislation where it's at?
Yes, I believe so. And they realize that, given the current amount of licensed producers and what they're producing, there will be a shortage of supply come once it's legalized for recreational use in 2018. They've even gone to the point where prior to May, they were coming to your site and doing a physical inspection. And now applicants are getting their license based on a video conference and a video inspection. And that's your license to cultivate. So they'll go through your facility based on the video. If they say, well, everything we see is consistent with everything you've written in your application, here's your license to cultivate. You can grow one crop. Prior to you getting your license to sell, we will come in and inspect your facility to make sure that your security system meets our standards and requirements. Your crop itself, in terms of the pesticides, and whatever else they test for it, to making sure that it's a safe product available for sale, and your processes in terms of your standard operating procedures. Based on a satisfactory on-site inspection, they will then issue a license to sell.
So you want to put together a specific product that is going to help to deal with a particular medical issue.
Yes.
How do you start to source the right plant? And then how do you cultivate that so that you can meet what is perceived to be the need?
So that will come from the research that we're doing with the University of British Columbia. And we reached out to experts. We reached out to the University of Fraser Valley. Tom Bowman, who's the head of the horticulture department, has a wealth of knowledge in greenhouse production and growing. We brought on other master growers who've got the direct experience of growing cannabis plants. So we're very much relying on their expertise. If we say, well, here's what we talked to, here's UBC's given us this information on certain strains that will help certain ailments, and then go to our grower and say, well, can you grow this strain? And if you can, what conditions or what type of growing conditions are optimal, so we can ensure that we have the right equipment, right, and we have the right controls within our greenhouse.
It's my understanding in the application process, they look at the qualifications of everyone.
I think the most important person in your application is your quality assurance person. This is a person responsible for making sure that all of our processes are to the highest standards, that our crops are not infected with any pesticides, and that sanitation is a priority within the site. This is essentially like we're building it's a pharmaceutical grade facility, and so they really look closely at the qualifications of your quality assurance person. I think that is the most important person. They'll look and see what educational credentials they have, and also in terms of work experience. In terms of your master grower, it's hard to see someone who's kind of graduated with a master's in growing, right? It's there's people that have got over 40 years of experience, but they don't want to be divulging that because this has only been illegal for so many years.
As you get going, you're obviously going to have to hire people.
Yes.
And what do you anticipate will be the job creation that you'll have here? How many people will be working in a facility like this? Anywhere
between 25 to 50 people, I think, within the first year, we expect. And it's going to be a learning curve, but we're relying on our master grower, as long as with the advisors we have, to come up with a training manual. And we've got over almost 500 standard operating procedures. So there's going to be a lot of good instructions, and the focus is going to be on training. I think training is going to be the most important thing for all of our employees, and then having a good quality assurance manager and operations manager, and to give people a reminder, it's
Right.
to have that ongoing training.
So I wanted to have you on to talk about, what's the process that you go through, and like how rigorous is it? There's other complications though as well, and that is, in the financial markets, I understand that there's a number of financial institutions who go, no thanks,
Yes.
don't want to have anything to do with it.
Yes.
And so then how do you start to work your way around that? Because you're going to have the ability to carry out commercial transactions.
Yes. Yeah, it becomes very difficult as a private company to fund these projects. Myself, we've spoken to banks, and most commercial banks, I believe almost all of them, except for I think Scotiabank, has said that they'll start to lend. But if you are not a licensed producer, it becomes very difficult, especially because it is still considered an illegal product in the United States. So a lot of commercial banks will not provide funding, even for the purchase of your property, if you don't have any production going on. So you have to go get private money, private lenders, and to date, that's what we've done. We funded ourselves privately, and
through a limited partnership, or with
through limited partnership, we've reached out to friends and family, right, and our own personal funds that we've put into the facility. Sorry, not the facility, the project, and primarily the land. And I think, but the end goal is to become a public company. I think it's been a very, very effective tool for many companies to raise funds. And especially in the starting years, if you followed some of the companies out there, such as Canopy and Afria, you realize that it takes an enormous amount of capital within the first few years. It's not profitable.
Okay, how big is an enormous amount of capital? Roughly, what are you looking at as an investment to get going?
So for our facility in Mission, we would be looking at minimum $6 million to have the facility completed.
So by the time you've gone through the application process, because I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of legal fees that are associated with that, and the whole process, you're looking at $6 million investment.
Yeah,
and there's no guarantee that you're going to become a licensed producer.
That depends on the size of your facility. So,
Right.
so if you have a smaller facility, it could be much less. From all the experts I've talked to, they say it's roughly anywhere from $200 to $300 a square foot to build a facility. And on top of that, now imagine if Health Canada says, well, here's your license to cultivate. You can cultivate one or maybe two crops. That could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Where you have people that are working on payroll, but you're not getting any revenue. Right? So you'd have to have working capital set up.
You have to have working capital as well.
Exactly. So it becomes challenging. And
this is not a gold rush. It's a calculated business decision.
Exactly, and we see the benefit in the long run, which is why we've been committed to the research and development, and we're not in it for the short term. So we understand that it's an investment for the long run, and I think it weeds out a lot of people. Well, no pun intended.
Yeah.
For all the people that are not into this for the long run and who are not serious players. I think Health Canada has it makes it challenging, but then again you have qualified people, professional people that are entering this industry.
So if you were talking to somebody right now who goes, oh yeah, I want to get in on that, what would be your number one insight that you would share? I'm sure there's not everything that you want to, because it's going to be a competitive marketplace, but what is that number one thing that you would say, okay, you might want to consider this before you take the next step forward?
You have to have patience, you have to be well funded, and also make sure you surround yourself with a good team, people as well. And I think that's very important.
So you chose the medical environment. Why not go recreational?
At the time when we submitted our application, there was it wasn't 100% sure. That's when the Conservative government and Stephen Harper's government was in power. So there was no indication of, or we didn't really see a timeline for when recreational sales would be legal. Also, we see a huge potential in the medicinal market. There was a great article written by Dr. M.J. Malloy, who's working with us, and he firmly believes that cannabis may be an opiate replacement, right? Because it has a lot less side effects as well. Leads to a lot less overdoses.
Yes.
And I believe there have been a lot of firms that have been looking at, yes, recreational sales are coming, and I believe for us, yes, recreational sales are coming down the road. But we right now,
you might diversify into that later on.
Yeah, at this moment in time, we know that medicinal cannabis is legal. Let's put our focus to that. Let's put our focus on research and development, and it goes right down to why we started this application, is because we want it to be involved in a business that creates products that can help improve the quality of lives of people that are suffering from illnesses like cancer, right? And that's been our goal from day one, and that's what our focus is, and that's why we're committed to creating products that could directly help improve the lives of people.
Well, I have met people and done stories about people who use cannabis to manage chronic pain, and they said the difference in their life in getting off of pharmaceutical drugs and switching to medical marijuana is remarkable. Absolutely remarkable, and there's a huge cost saving to them. So,
it's a great feeling. It goes back to that documentary I saw on Sanjay Gupta, and it just from the very basics. So when I saw a child that was taking Valium or Celebrex and couldn't do a thing a child should be able to do, like ride a bicycle, right? It really impacts you. It has a huge impact when you see the impact it has on children, and then you see them taking a simple oil dosage, and just the joy in their face that, you know what, I'm able to do what my friend who's the same age as me can do, something simple as riding a bike. Right?
Well, best of luck. Thank you very much for coming in and doing this.
Thank you very much for having me anytime.
My pleasure.